And I just want to say thank you to all the witnesses who came here to testify today. Mr. Floyd, Ms. Underwood, Jacobs. It takes an incredible amount of courage to come here and talk about this after losing a loved one. So I know I speak for all my colleagues when I thank you for your willingness to come here and share your stories with this committee. And as Leader McCarthy said earlier today, George and Patrick will not be forgotten. Everyone in this room agrees that police officers who abuse their power must be held accountable for their crimes. But I hope that we can also agree that the vast majority of law enforcement officers choose their line of work because they want to protect their communities. They put themselves in harm's way every single day, and they do it to keep us and America safe. In southwestern Pennsylvania, we've seen firsthand how the selflessness of the police actually saves lives. In 2018, 11 Jewish worshipers were killed by a hateful, anti-Semitic madman at the Tree of Life synagogue. The Pittsburgh police and police from around the region ran into open gunfire, and if it were not for their heroic efforts, the tragic loss of life could have been much worse. So that's why I'm incredibly alarmed to hear calls from the left to defund our nation's police departments. And those on the left can try to minimize this, but I just heard my colleague from Arizona go through a litany of statements from those on the left that are calling for defunding and dismantling police departments. I think that if anything, the murder of George Floyd demonstrates the need to invest more in our police departments. We should focus on improving training to promote good police practices. We should also be providing mental health care, especially for those that are struggling with PTSD and other job-related stresses. Additionally, we should work to build stronger bonds between law enforcement and the communities they serve. We can start by having school resource officers in our schools. But I recognize, we must recognize and we must empower good police officers while terminating bad actors. With that said, Mr. Bongino, do you think that defunding our nation's police departments is an effective way of addressing instances of police misconduct?
No, it's a disastrous policy. And I think one of the issues that hasn't been considered are the second-order effects. I mean, obviously, the first-order effects are quite obvious. Less police on the streets means more crime. There's simply no deterrent to crime unless you trust in the goodness of every man's heart, which would be potentially disastrous. You are going to have more crime. But think about the second-order effects. Has anyone on the panel considered the brain drain that would happen? You will have child abuse investigators who have a very unique ability. They've accumulated over time to look a child in the eye and know right away when they're trying to protect an abuse of a parent because they've been threatened. I've seen it. What about child sexual abuse online, where some of these people, they can look at an image and tell 6 different degrees of separation, how that person got there and who that abused child is? You're going to defund them too? What about the latent print officer that shows up at your house for a burglary that's been taking fingerprints for 20 years? You're going to teach someone that in 5 minutes in a social worker police academy? Again, God bless our social workers. That's not what they do. What about the homicide detectives I worked with? When I was a young rookie Secret Service agent, I couldn't break a guy on an interrogation. I couldn't get him to admit the crime. He didn't want to admit it. We had a guy walk in, he walked in, knew how to interview. Within 5 minutes, we had a full confession, admitted to everything, because he'd done it before. And he knew exactly the back and forth of interview and interrogation. These are skills that are going to be missing from our streets. You don't understand the catastrophe that would follow. And I can't emphasize in strong enough terms a disaster this would be if anyone follows through on it.
Thank you, Mr. Bongino. And I want to talk about the effect this would have on the communities that are most vulnerable. For example, affluent communities, if the police forces were dismantled and defunded, those affluent communities would just hire private police firms. In fact, there's anecdotal evidence that's already happened in some places. But could you talk about the effect, the sad irony we would see if this happened and what it would have on the most vulnerable communities?
Yeah, think about it. With the 7-5 precinct in East New York, Brooklyn, where I worked, a couple of years before I got there, they had more homicides in that one precinct in New York City than the entire city of Baltimore had a few years ago. By the time I got there in the 90s, they had cut that down to such a point that the entire crime rate in New York City was almost equivalent to that of Baltimore City, a city multiple times the size. This will save real lives if we increase our police, not decrease our police budgets. That's insane.
Thank you, and I yield.